Okay, so we're going to get started because we have a lot to do today, so we're going to start straight at 11:30. So the purpose of this course is to rebuild Google Inbox and in the 45 minutes that we have using Flexbox and Grids. I'm going to show you that it's not as hard as it looks. I've been able to do it now several times in just under an hour. And so that's the purpose of this course, is hopefully going to teach us a little bit more about how to use Flexbox and Grids and use it by way of example. So out of curiosity, how many people here have used Google Inbox? Okay, Google Inbox is like Gmail. It's an email thing made by Google. It's really cool. It's really good. Here's what it looks like in real life. I just took a screenshot. And so when I look at this screenshot, I think about a few things. When I look at it, I see this. I see a top row, and I see 3 columns below it. I look at it kind of like a table, right? I have one row that spans all 3 columns, and I have 3 columns in the second row. And so this entire Google Inbox is made up of 2 rows, 3 columns. The top row just happens to span all 3 columns. Okay? So this is a great time to use CSS Grids. CSS Grids is like tables, but way better. They're on steroids, but it is creating a grid system. So I'm going to create a CSS grid that has 2 rows, 3 columns, and the top row is going to span the 3 columns. Does that make sense? So it's going to be a live coding demo. Here's where we're trying to get to with all of this interactive stuff. We'll see how far we get. But I'm going to reset us back to absolute 0. And we're left with a blank page. Okay? And here's the code for that blank page. Nothing but a blank HTML file. We're going to put the styles up here, and we're going to put the HTML down here. And if I type in hello world and save, you'll see it here. So you guys can follow along if you want in an HTML file, or if you just want to watch, that's fine. But like I said, we're going to go semi-fast because we have a lot to build in a short time. Okay? So what I'm going to do here is, keeping this picture in mind, I'm going to create 4 HTML elements, 1 for the header, 1 for a left sidebar, 1 for a right sidebar, and 1 for the main content. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. I'm going to have a header. I'm going to say it's a header so we know it. I'm going to do the left-hand side, if you look at Google Drive or Google Inbox, is navigation. So I'm going to make it a nav element. I'm going to say left sidebar, and then we have a main, and then we have a right sidebar. And we get this, right? In CSS, these are, this is going to mess up with things later. It's small, but we have 3 divs all stacking on top of each other. They're all display blocks, so that's how they stack. Okay. What I'm going to do is I want to put a border around all these so we can kind of see, we can track what all happens with them. So I'm going to create a container around this. And I'm going to do .container. Oops, I want to get all of the direct children of the container, and I'm going to put a border of 1 pixel solid light gray around them. Save it so that we can see these 3 divs. Okay? There shouldn't be too much confusion at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use CSS Grids. So I'm going to dig right in. I'm going to make this container be a grid container. So I'm going to say display grid. What you're going to notice when I save is nothing happened. Okay? Because we need to define what the grid looks like. Each grid has a template, and we need to define what that template looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. What I'm going to say is the grid template, there are going to be 2 columns, right? And I'm going to list here, separated by space, the widths of the 2 columns. Okay? Or sorry, there's 3 columns. 3 columns, 2 rows. So this first column I'm going to say is 200 pixels. I'm going to say this right column is 200 pixels, and everything in between is just want to take up the rest of the space. Okay? So in CSS Grids, I'm going to do it like this: 200 pixels, and then on the right hand side is 200 pixels, and in between I'm going to use something that means take up the rest of the space. If I were to use auto, what auto does is it fits it to the content. That's not what we want. We want to take up the full space even if the content doesn't, right? So in CSS Grids, they introduced a new, what's the word? Measurement unit, thank you. And it is the FR unit. And it stands for the fraction of remaining space left. How much of the fraction of the remaining space left do you want to take? Well, I want to take the full thing, so I'm just going to put 1 FR, take up the rest of the remaining space. And if I go over here, it still hasn't done anything yet because we need to define the rows now. So we've got the columns. Now we're going to go grid template rows. The first row is going to be as tall as the contents, and then the second row is going to be the rest of the page. So I'm going to say auto to say fill up according to the space of the contents, and then take up the rest. Okay? When I save it this time, hopefully, we're going to see something different. And we didn't. Oh, do you know why? I'm putting it on all the children. Did somebody just say that? That's my bad. So I'm going to make a container that is just on the container, not the children. Put this here, save, and we end up with our grid. Okay? So what it's doing is it defined 3 columns. It had 2 rows, but they look nothing like we wanted it to look. We wanted the header to take the full 3 rows, or the full 3 columns on the first row and push everything down to the second row. Okay? So I'm going to fix that by saying I want to grab our header, and I'm going to tell it where to start on this grid and where to end on this grid. Okay? Each of these grids, so this grid has lines, right? It has this line 1, line 2, line 3, and line 4, also called tracks in CSS Grid. So I want the header to go from line 1 to line 4. I explained that so that if I was thinking about it and I wanted to span 3 columns, I would put 1 to 3, but it's from line to line, so 1 to line 4. So I'm going to say that you are going to start on column 1, and you're going to go until column 4. Okay. And if I save that, what happens? That is really small. Is header takes up three columns, the second, and that pushes everything else down, and these start taking up the next row, and we have left sidebar, main, and the right sidebar. Cool? Everyone follow that? So there's an easier way to write this in CSS Grids. Instead of specifying the beginning and the end, if I wanted it to span 3 columns, I can actually just say span 3, and this will do the same thing. If I save, come over here, it looks the exact same. To me, it's a little bit more readable. It's saying span 3 columns after you get to the first line, right? Great. So that's kind of cool, except for in the mobile space, if we were to shrink the page, this is responsive and that's great, but I want it to look a little bit different in mobile, right? What I'd like to have happen is have the header at the top, the main directly underneath it that takes up a good chunk of the page, and then the left sidebar and right sidebar down at the bottom. So I am going to write a media query that will allow us to do that. So media queries allow us to target different widths of devices. And what this media query is saying, everything above a tablet size. Okay? So everything that we've written, I was planning to be in the tablet size. So I'm actually going to move it into the tablet plus media query, except for this one because I think we always want the container to be grid, and then the header we don't need down here. So now if I come back here and I'm in big size, it looks the exact same because that's what our media query it was saying. But if I were to start shrinking this, we lost the definition here of the columns and rows, so it's just doing what it thinks is best. Okay. This is pretty good, except for I want to do 2 things here. One is I wish that the sidebar came after the main, and then the main came above the sidebar. So we're going to fix that here in a second. And I also wish that main took up the rest of the space. That make sense? So in order to do that, I'm going to actually go back to the desktop, and I'm going to fix a few things. First thing I want to fix is, on the container, I want the min width to be the height of the screen. So when I pop over here, Sorry, thank you. Min height now, this is taking up the rest of the screen, right? That's great. That's exactly what we wanted. The second thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this part to be a little bit easier. So in addition to when you're defining a template, in addition to defining the columns and the rows, I can also name specific areas in the grid. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to grid template. I'm going to name specific areas. And the way the CSS property looks like, and I've never seen another CSS property look quite like this. This is a little bit weird to me. But I'm going to have two pairs of quotations. These stand for rows. So this is row 1, this is row 2. And in the first row, I'm going to have 3 cells. And I'm going to call them all header, so that way the header spans the whole top row. Do you see what I'm doing? And in the second row, I can name these whatever I want. I'm going to say this is sidebar left, this is the main, and this is sidebar right. Okay? So then what I need to do is I need to tell the children elements to be put inside one of these areas that we've defined. Okay? So I'm going to do that here. In the header, instead of using these, I'm going to say go into the area called header. Okay? In the main, I want it to go into the grid area called main. In the nav, I want to go in the grid area called sidebar left. And in the right sidebar, I want it to go in the grid area called sidebar right. Okay? So when I save that and refresh, we get the exact same screen again. We've done nothing different, but instead of defining start at column 1, start at column 2, we've set up named grid areas, and now we've told each of these guys go inside of that grid area. The reason why I'm doing that is for the mobile design, what I want to do is this, is I want, the mobile styles can go here because if the desktop stuff is going to overwrite this because it comes later in the file. You see that? So here I'm going to put the mobile design. I'm going to say grid template columns. I only want one column in my mobile design because I want all, that's I feel like fairly common in mobile design. So I'm going to make just one column, it's the 100% of the width. And I'm going to have grid template rows. And what I was explaining earlier is that I wanted the header to take up its content. I wanted the next thing to be the main, and I wanted it to take up the rest of the space. And then I wanted the bottom, the sidebar left, sidebar right to come right underneath it, and they can take up their content. So I'm going to save, oh wait, now I also need to do grid template areas here, and this is going to look different. I'm going to have 4 rows. Oops. Okay. And they're each going to have one column in it. So this is header, this is the main, this is sidebar left, and this is sidebar right. I'm going to save, come over here, and so this is our desktop where the header, left, main, right sidebar happen. When I shrink to mobile, watch what happens. This is pretty cool. Now we have header, sidebar, main, right sidebar. So something's not quite right about that because I said for the main to come after the header, right? And if I look to see why it is doing that,
Are inside the media.
Sorry, what?
The grid area definitions down there are inside your media grid.
Are they really?
Header, main, grid.
Well, then what's? Oh, yes, thank you. Perfect. Thank you, Steve. Okay. Good call. Whoa, that's not what we want to go to. Okay, sweet. Now this works. The main is now in the middle, and so I can literally change the order using CSS rather than changing the HTML to change the order, right? And so that's pretty powerful, and this makes it to where our transition from desktop to mobile is pretty sick. I like this. Any questions about what we've done so far? Yes?
When you define the columns for the mobile, you said 100%, and then on the next one you did the 1FR. Are those equivalent? Could I have put 1FR on the first one?
Right.
Grid template columns 100%, could that be 1FR even though it's all by itself?
Yes. I think. Hang on. It depends on if the width goes all the way. Yeah, that'll work. Great following along. Any other questions? This is actually the only part of CSS Grid that we're going to cover. We're going to use Flexbox for the rest of the app. So if there's any other grid questions, I'm not an expert at grid at all. I just happen to know how to use it for this particular site.
What's the browser support like?
For CSS Grid, so it's pretty good. Let's go to, hopefully our internet works. Can I use, if I type in CSS Grid, it's even supported in IE11. It's a different flavor, so that's a miracle. And it's very well supported at this point. So I feel very confident using it right now. I do at work. Great question. Another question was there?
Are you going to build on this example?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you go to that to your source code?
Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to stay on this screen?
I just wanted to look at it. Can you also scroll down to the desktop version?
Making sense so far? Yes.
Does the order of defining the grid areas for each element and the grid template areas matter in CSS?
No. You can define where they come before you define the grid, before you define the areas. Great question. Okay. Sweet. The next part that we're going to develop is I think might be the trickiest part to think through, is this header. Because you have an icon here, text here, you have a search bar here that's a little bit bigger than height-wise than the inbox, but it's still perfectly vertically aligned. You have 4 buttons over here, and I want to make this look pretty in the mobile. Unfortunately, when I use inbox and I try to do the mobile thing, it's not responsive that way. I don't know how they do what they do, but they don't do it the way I do it. So I don't know how they make it look in the mobile design, but we're going to come up with our own.
They don't support it. They have an app, but they don't have mobile support.
There you go. There you go. But we will here in about 15 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, instead of bothering to put in icons right now, I'm just going to have placeholder boxes, and then we can fill in the icons later. And so here's an icon text. I'm going to put a big box for now, and then 4 small boxes. And we're just going to do this for modeling purposes. Okay? So I'm going to come here to our header, and as promised, I'm going to come up with a div that has an icon class, and we'll put an icon. We'll make it to where we can see the box really easy. And then I'm also going to give this 40 pixels and the height of 40 pixels. Okay? Come over here. Here's my icon. Okay? So now I am going to write inbox, save, come over here. Inbox appears below it because this was a block element. This is just falling in line, but we're going to fix that here in a second. So then we have another div that I'm going to make our search container. I'm going to leave it mostly empty for now, except for, okay, search container, except for I'm not going to put a width on it yet. Okay, and I'm going to type in search here so we know what's supposed to come here. And then it was followed by 4 icons at the far right hand side. Okay, save, and it looks awful. Okay, this is what we expected. This is so we're going to fix this. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to convert this header into a Flexbox. There's a couple reasons why I think through that, and I want you to think through it too. Is the number one thing that indicated to me I wanted to do it, honestly, is that all of these things in here are vertically aligned. And so I'm like, I want a Flexbox for that rather than, it's the only way, but there's other ways, but it's the easiest way to vertically align things. Okay, so I'm going to make my header a Flexbox by defining it to be flex. Okay, if I save and come over here, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to put it all in one line. and it has lots of remaining space. If you'll see over here, it's here's the whole header, but after the last element, it has lots of remaining space. Okay. So what I want to do, and what I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to do two things here. The first thing I'm going to teach you about is what margin auto does inside of a Flexbox, which is a really cool thing. Margin auto and Flexbox go hand in hand, and they were meant to be used together. So what I'm going to do, in order to kick these 4 icons to the far right, what I'm going to do is here at this first icon, I'm going to say margin left be auto, and what's going to do is going to kick everything over. Don't believe it until you see it. I'm going to have a dot right, and I'm going to say margin left equals auto. Save it, and what happens? Kicks them all over to the right hand side. That's pretty magical. That's great because this is completely responsive. I can anyway, that blows my mind. That's so cool. But what I'm going to use this again later. I'm going to comment this out for now because I want you to visually see what I'm doing next. So they're back here. What I want to do is I want this search container to take up the remaining space, and it's going to push all of these 4 boxes over just because it's taking up the remaining space. Okay. So unlike CSS Grids where you can use 1FR, we have to define how this flex item can grow, how it can shrink, depending on what the available space is and what its default width should be. So here's how we use that. I say flex. The first number I put is how much it should grow in relationship to every other child. Okay? So by default, all of flex children are of grow 0. Okay? So I'm going to make it grow 1, and all the rest of them are going to be 0, which means this gets to take up the full rest of the space because no one else is competing for it. They're all 0. Does that make sense? I want it to also shrink with the other items, and the default flex shrink value for children is 1, so this is going to be the same. And then what's the default width? It should just be auto. That doesn't actually matter in this particular example. What we've done now is we've moved the search bar to take up the remaining space, pushes over these 4, and we're looking great at this point. Any questions about this spot? Okay. So if you look though at the mocks, the search bar doesn't take up the full space. There's gap here, there's a gap here, but it's centered in that space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an inner div here. I'm going to call it search. Okay. And I'm going to move the border down here because I no longer want a border on the container. I just want it on the child. And I'm going to say that it has a max width of 800 pixels. I'm also going to put a width of 100% so that if it's less than 800 pixels, it takes up the remaining space. And I want the height to go here. It doesn't matter, but that's what I want. Sweet. So we made our search bar narrower, but we want to center this inside of the. We want to center it inside of the remaining space. Okay. So imagine here, there's an outer div that's taking up all of this. This is an inner div, and so I can center this inner div inside of this outer div using Flexbox. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to search container. It is a flex child, but I can also make that flex child a Flexbox because I want to be able to align it to the center. Okay. So in Flexbox, you can align things vertically and you can align things horizontally. When you align things horizontally, you use what's called justify content. When you align things vertically, you use what is called align items. I had a hard time memorizing that justify meant horizontally, align meant vertically. The way I finally figured out how I was going to memorize it was that in Microsoft Word, when up at the top, you can left align things, you can middle align, you can right align, and then the box to the right next to it is what? Justify. And justify in that case means take up the fulls. It's dealing with this direction. So finally, that's how, hopefully you guys will remember it that way. Justify content means to align things horizontally. Align items means to align things vertically. So I want to align this horizontally. So I'm going to use justify content, and I want it to align in the center. If I save this, come over here, pops into the center of the remaining space. Pretty cool, huh? Any questions about this? Let me show you. As I shrink, the remaining space gets smaller until it can't fit that anymore, and then all of these are going to start shrinking, and that's looking pretty good. I like that so far. Yes?
With the search, so everything between inbox and those squares on the right-hand side is its own div, so that's why the inner div search is centered, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Great following. Real quick, I'm going to finish out the search bar. It has an icon, an input field, and another icon over here, toggle. And I'm just going to build that really quick. Instead of search, I'm going to put an icon. Okay. And then I'm going to put a text field. And then I'm going to have some placeholder text that says search. And then there is going to be another icon. So if I come back here, it pushed main down. Why? Because this was a div and it's a block element, so it's going to push things down. I'm going to fix this using Flexbox. Okay, I want it to be pushed up and I want it vertically aligned again. Anytime I want vertical alignment, I cheat. I use Flexbox. Maybe use it too much to a fault. I just love it. So I'm going to say display flex, and in order to align them vertically, I'm going to use align items, and I want them in the center of the vertical space. Save this, come over here, the search pops up there. I'm going to really quick do search input and make this width of 100% and height of 100%, and just hope that it does what I ask it to, and it does. So now we have an icon vertically aligned with the text, and then another icon over here somewhat mirroring this. Okay. Along the same token, to vertically align, this inbox is just floating up here. That's annoying. Or what if technically the search was supposed to be a little bit bigger than the icons? How do I make these things align vertically perfect? I'm going to use Flexbox, and I'm going to use align items to be in the center, and it's going to kick down that inbox to be centered. Cool, right? Way easier than this used to be. Luckily, I've been only a front-end developer for a year. I never dealt with floats and all the other things you guys had to put up with. This is the way I was raised. This is great, right? Love it. It's magic to me. One thing I want to do, though, here is as I'm shrinking and going into my mobile design, what I would like to see happen, since Google Inbox doesn't give me an example, is I would like to see the search bar pushed down into its own row and have 4 icons over here, icon and inbox over here, but have the search be in its own row because I want it that way. So what I've just defined here is my desktop, is what I want for desktop. Okay, so here's how I'm going to do this for mobile. And I don't know how to explain this the best, so maybe I'm just going to code it and then hopefully it just triggers, okay? Is I'm going to make the search take up 100%. And then I'm going to make this flex wrapper be able to wrap and go onto a second row. So if this is 100% and the flex wrapper can wrap, it's going to push things into new rows. And because I want 100%, it's going to make a row in and of itself. So I'm going to say flex wrap. You can wrap. By default, it's no wrap. Okay. And then I'm going to make the search container be with 100%. I'm going to say. So exactly what I thought was going to happen. This wants 100% of the width, and so it's going to push this onto its own line, and it's going to wrap the next icons underneath it. This is kind of cool, except for I wanted these 4 icons up here in this top right-hand corner. So the way I can solve that is with Flex, I want to reorder these items to where this search container comes last, and these things all come before it. That's possible in Flexbox very easily. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the search container, And by default, all of Flex Children's items, they're of order 0. So if I make this any number, it's going to be bigger than all the rest of the other ones. But I'm going to pick an arbitrarily high number because. So now what happens, it moves it into its own line. And I'm going to, whoop, that was a mistake. And then I'm going to uncomment out this right thing so that these kick over to the right. And we've got what I'm looking for. Does that make sense? Any questions about how we did this mobile part? If
Does order work kind of like z-index? It's just like give things general numbers relative to each other.
Sure. Let's go with that definition. That's a great way to understand it. I don't know if it's true, but it's a great way to understand it. Okay, so if I were to leave it like this and go back to my desktop, it's completely messed up. So I'm just going to, in my media query for desktop, I am going to override what I put here for the, no, wait, what am I looking for? For the search container. I don't know why I typed that. Search container, rather than making this be order 100, I'm going to put it back to 0. Rather than having the min width be 100%, I'm going to put this back to auto. Thank you. It even told me. And now we're back to normal. So watch this transition as we go from big to small. It's pretty sweet, right? Flexbox and Grid make this very, very easy, and I'm glad they do. And again, this doesn't have all the fancy icons and things like that, but we're getting the general structure down. Okay? So, any questions about what we covered so far? These are the two most advanced things of this course. Yes?
So, I don't really see any benefit to having Flexbox when it seems like you can do all of this stuff in Grid.
Okay.
Is there a benefit?
Yes, and I'm not sure I'm the best one to answer it, but one explanation I've heard is that Grid would be better used for big items, like big, your whole page's layout, whereas Flexbox is good for the small and nitty gritty. Another thing that I like is that with the FlexWrap, it doesn't have to this doesn't have to look like a table. It doesn't have to look like a grid. It can just be, I'm going to pop this one down, and I don't have to predefine how big my widths are going to be. They're just all dynamic. Whereas Grid, you have to predefine how wide it is. Does that make sense? So I think there's a fuzzy line. I don't think I answered the question well, but there is a fuzzy line, and I'm also more familiar with Flexbox, so there's a second reason. Any other questions? Yes?
If you were to put something else on the shrink part of the flex on the search bar, would that have a similar effect, or like prevent you from getting lower than a certain size and wrap them around without you having to specify a screen size for that to happen?
Great question. So if I were to say 0, meaning don't shrink at all, then as soon as it gets to 800 pixels, it's not going to shrink at all, and it's going to stay 800 pixels, or it's going to stay 100% at this point. And so yes, doing the shrink is going to affect things. If I were to put a bigger value of shrink rather than 0, meaning do shrink, what these numbers mean is this is 1 relative to everything else. Okay, this is 2 relative to everything else. So if I were to put some high number, it's not going to actually affect us. What did I do? I don't know what I just did, but I'm going to put it back at 1. I'm going to ask you if your question was answered. I don't think so. Great question. Any other questions besides that one? Okay, great. So now we're going to build out this left sidebar and the right sidebar. These are pretty easy. If you remember on the left, this is just a list of tiles, really, that are navigation items. But you'll notice Each of these is vertically aligned with the icon, so I'm going to make each of these children a flex container so I can vertically align them. This is super easy. I am going to go over here to the left sidebar and say div.tile, and we're going to, let's see, inbox, and also there's going to be an icon right in it. Make this look a little bit prettier. And now I'm going to define tile up here just so that we can see it. I'm going to put a border around it. I want the height to be about 40 pixels. Let's make them 50 pixels. And the width to be 100%, which is kind of silly because they're block elements, so they will take up 100%. But so here we have it. We have a div. It's a block element, so it's going to kick down everything underneath. And we have this text, and I want this to wrap up and be vertically aligned. So I'm going to make, this be a flex container. If I do that, display flex. Okay, Steve, now what am I doing wrong?
Did you want the tile itself? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What do you want the icon to look like?
Oh, yeah, it was just delayed. Thank you, whoever said that. I actually don't think I pushed save. That was the problem. So now I want these to be vertically aligned in the center. Thanks everyone for your help. And it's going to pop them down to be centered. This looks great, right? So I could duplicate several of these if I wanted to. Not going to worry about it too much. I'm just going to put 3 more. This one's I'm going to call snoozed, and this one I'm going to call done, because I think that's what Google Inbox has. Snooze and then done, yeah. So that's how I make the left sidebar. I just keep duplicating these tiles for the rest of the stuff. I'm not going to do that. This is how I would do it. Any questions about that? Cool. Yes?
So, the image tag used to have a alignment where it would line the text in the middle there.
V-align?
Yeah, and I don't know that it ever worked very well for me.
It didn't.
It seems like that would be the more appropriate way to align those with the images. Is there additional benefit that you can turn the whole thing into a Flexbox?
Great question. So if I were to do that, this image would not be vertically aligned in the container. Like this icon wouldn't be vertically aligned, right? Just the text in relationship to the image, right? So if I want this icon right here to be vertically aligned, I don't think I could do that with V-align. And I might be wrong. Like I said, I'm a new baby into the CSS world, so I didn't have to do these type of things. I've always had Flexbox.
So aligning icon in its box. Okay, good enough.
Good enough? Okay, good. Thanks for going easy on me. Okay, so now we're going to build the right sidebar. Okay, how are we doing on time? Everyone still good? Okay, right sidebar, we're going to have a bunch. I'm not going to do this new conversation. It's boring. I'm just going to do this part, okay? It has an icon vertically aligned with this text and this text in the center. So what I'm going to do is on the right sidebar, I'm going to make a div that I'm going to call, these are, in Google Inbox, these are chats. So I'm going to name the class as chat. And it has an icon in it. And I'm going to keep that for now, and I'm going to define chat up here to be border 1 pixel solid black, and also have it be of height. Let's make this even bigger, 60 pixels, and width is not necessary, but I do it. Great, so we have this icon. It's not aligned inside of its parent container. I'm going to change that in a second by making this into a Flexbox. And then I'm also going to type in 2 spans. One that is, this is the name of the person I'm chatting with, and the other span is, this is the preview text that we're going to be looking for. So it says, hey man, how are, okay? So right now this is not the way we want it to look, but with Flexbox it's going to be pretty easy. I'm going to go over here to the chat. I'm going to make it be a flex container. That makes it all into one row. I want to vertically align this stuff, so I'm going to use align items. Put it in the center of the vertical space. This is looking better, but this was a span, this was a span. All these are going to be vertically aligned, but it's going to create kind of this column thing that I don't want, right? I want these two things to be in their own div that is vertically aligned with this icon. So I'm going to do exactly what I just stated and put these inside of their own div. Come over here. Oh, yeah, I just use the divs so that they're block elements. Come back over here, puts it in its own line. They're all vertically aligned to each other. Does that work? So as you can see here, in my estimation, and maybe to my detriment, I use Flexbox for almost everything. It makes me very happy, and so I do it. I'm also going to add, where is our icon? I'm going to make these icons separate just a little bit, and also this header was supposed to have some padding, so I'm going to throw in some padding here, make this look better. It does. We're building out this whole thing, right? So if I were to duplicate this a million times, this chat, come back over here, starting to look reasonable, right? Any questions about what we've done so far? Let's look at it in mobile view. Nothing too drastic. This is not how Google Inbox is. I would drive me crazy if it was, where they had the left sidebar, the right sidebar directly below it. For this particular course, I'm not going to solve that problem. But there are definitely cool ways that you could solve that problem. No questions about this so far? Okay, great. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat. I have already built this all. I used it. I made it in React. The only reason why I did was so that I could make this into a component and have a million chats. I can make this into a component. I can make this header into a component. I can make all the sidebars into components. And I love React, as I think everyone should. So I'm going to just show you here where we get to in the React world. We'd end up like what we had, except for now this is blue. Okay. To add emails would be pretty easy. I'm going to explain it rather than actually code it. We have here a bunch of, I made them flex items so that I could vertically align all these. So this email header, this email thing is a flexbox. This is a flexbox. This is a flexbox. If you look here, this is something interesting. This is where the flex grow and shrink really come into handy. And the flex basis is I set up a default width using flex basis on this item, but then I made it shrink faster than everything. And then this I put a shrink on it. I made this shrink faster than this, and you'll see this with flex shrink in a second. Watch this. So it gets a lot smaller, while the space between here actually doesn't decrease at all. And this was accomplished using the flex property. I have this grow has a 1, 1, 1, and then this is a flex shrink of 1 with a flex shrink of 0, and this has a flex basis. If you didn't know in CSS, you can have ellipses using text overflow. There's also now position sticky. If this is new to you, embrace it. It's awesome. Watch this header right here, this today. Using position sticky, I can make it stick at the top until it gets to the next one, and then it's going to be replaced. Position sticky is awesome. Okay, this is a lot harder back in the day, and in mobile design, I wish actually that Google did this where it would be sticky. They didn't do this. It's just something I wanted to do. And I'm going to take us back to the end product. Ask for questions. If there are none, people can go to lunch early. So here's our end game, right? And with React, it was pretty easy to add this, to make this be toggleable. Maybe. Just kidding, not. But I don't know why that's the case. But anyway, so this is how I would rebuild Google Inbox using Flexbox. Like I said, we just did most of this and we could have polished it off easily. We did this in 45 minutes. It's not hard to do. They came up with good, easy designs that are plain. But using Flexbox and CSS Grid sure make it easier, and I'm glad they exist. And hopefully you learned a little bit about how to implement them. Any questions? Yes?
Do you have that file source code somewhere?
Yes, I do. I put it inside of the join.me. If that doesn't work, then my GitHub is cgod92. CGOD92. Any other questions?
Say that again.
My GitHub, CGOOD92. CGOD92. Any other questions? Yes?
Is this example going to be made available to us?
Yes, in the join.me as well as on the GitHub. So if you go to the join.me session, the link is there.
Join.in.
You what?
Join.in.
Join.in. Not join.me. Yeah, thank you. Join.in. Thank you. I'm messing up.
Link from the OpenWest schedule.
Listen to the man. Great. Any other questions? Great. Thanks for coming.